Rancher wrote his goodbye letter, but a beautiful Chinese single mother was screaming outside. The sun was beginning its slow descent over the vast open fields of the ranch. Its warm golden light spilled across the tall grass, turning every blade into a shining thread that danced with the soft breeze. The rancher sat on the old wooden porch of his small, weathered house, staring at the horizon with tired eyes. His hands, rough and calloused from decades of hard labor, rested on his knees. He had spent his whole life tending to the land, raising cattle, fixing fences, and making sure that every corner of the ranch was in order. And yet, despite all the work he had done and the life he had built, a quiet emptiness had settled over him, like a shadow that refused to leave. He had always known this day would come, though he had tried to ignore it for years. Life had a way of moving on, even when you were not ready to follow. Friends had come and gone. Family members, once close, had drifted away over time. The ranch, which had once been full of laughter and the noise of a bustling home, now felt vast, silent, and lonely. Only the wind and the distant call of birds kept him company, and even they seemed faint in the stillness of the evening. Inside his house, the furniture was simple but sturdy. A wooden table with scratches from years of meals and paperwork stood near the small kitchen. A single bed with a thin blanket rested in the corner. Everything had a place, everything had a purpose, and yet the house felt empty, hollow, like a vessel that had been drained of life. He thought about his youth, the energy and dreams he had once had. He remembered the excitement of starting the ranch, the pride of watching the first calves take their first steps, the satisfaction of a hard day's work completed. Those memories were vivid, but they were also distant, like photographs fading in the sunlight. That evening, he had decided it was time to write a letter. Not just any letter, but a letter that he hoped would explain everything he had felt for so long. It was not easy to put his thoughts into words. How could he capture decades of loneliness, regret, and unspoken feelings in a few pages? He wanted the letter to be honest, to tell the truth without hiding anything, even the mistakes he had made along the way. He wanted it to say goodbye in a way that was gentle, respectful, and clear. He fetched an old notebook from a drawer, its pages yellowed and fragile. He opened it carefully, as if opening an old friend's diary, and picked up a pen. The ink flowed slowly at first, hesitating, as if unsure of what it should say. He wrote about the ranch, about the cattle, about the fields that had been his life. He wrote about the quiet mornings when the world was still, and the only sounds were the soft footsteps of animals and the wind through the trees. He wrote about his mistakes, the opportunities he had missed, and the people he had lost along the way. As he wrote, memories flooded his mind. He remembered the laughter of children from nearby farms, their voices carrying over the fields like music. He remembered friends who had shared meals and stories by the fire. He remembered the nights when the stars shone so brightly that it felt as if the sky itself was watching over him. And he remembered the silence that had followed all of it, the quiet that now seemed permanent and inescapable. With every sentence, he poured a piece of his soul onto the paper. He wrote about the fear that had always been with him, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of being alone, and the fear that his life, despite all its hard work, might not have mattered at all. He wondered if anyone would ever read the letter, if anyone would understand the thoughts of a man who had spent a lifetime working in solitude. He wanted to leave something behind, something that told the story of his life, even if it was just words on a page. Outside, the wind continued to whisper through the grass, carrying with it the scent of earth and growing things. The rancher paused and looked out across the fields. A herd of cattle grazed quietly in the distance, unaware of the weight that had settled on the man's shoulders. He watched them for a long moment, feeling a strange mixture of pride and sadness. They were his responsibility, his companions in the long days of labor, yet they could not fill the void that had grown in his heart. Night was slowly approaching, and the sky shifted from gold to deep orange, then to shades of purple and blue. The rancher's pen moved faster now, as if the changing light reminded him that time would not wait. He wrote about the dreams he had never chased, the friendships he had neglected, and the love he had let slip away. He wrote with a raw honesty that hurt him to read, but also freed him in some way. He could almost feel the burden lifting, the weight of unspoken words finally leaving his chest. Finally, after what felt like hours, he set the pen down. The pages were filled with words, emotions, and confessions. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope, and sat back in his chair. For a moment he felt a strange calm, as if completing the letter had given him a sense of closure. He had expressed everything he had wanted to say, and now there was nothing left to hold back. The ranch was silent again, except for the gentle rustle of the wind. The man leaned back, letting the quiet wash over him. He thought about the life he had led, the choices he had made, and the solitude that had defined so many years. It was a life of hard work, perseverance, and survival, but also a life of loneliness, missed chances, and quiet regrets. And yet, even in that quiet, he felt a strange sense of peace. He had faced his own truth, written it down, and acknowledged it fully. Little did he know that the stillness of the evening was about to change. Something unexpected, something urgent was approaching, and it would interrupt his solitude in a way he could never have imagined. But for now, in this moment, the rancher sat alone on his porch, the letter in his hands, and the wide open fields stretched endlessly before him. The sky darkened, stars began to twinkle faintly in the distance, and the night held its breath, waiting for what would come next. He did not yet know that the quiet he had cherished was about to be broken, that his life might take a turn he had never anticipated, and that someone from a faraway land carrying a story of her own would soon scream outside his door, shattering the silence he had grown so used to. But at this moment he simply sat, alone with his thoughts, his pen, and the letter that carried the weight of a lifetime. The rancher's eyes grew heavy as he contemplated the evening. He thought about the work left to do, the fences that needed repair, the cattle that needed care. But in his mind, those tasks felt distant, unimportant, compared to the heavy emotions swirling inside him. He had lived a long life, but somehow it felt as though the most important chapter was still waiting to be written. And perhaps, he wondered, the next chapter would come when he least expected it. The quiet of the ranch that evening was suddenly shattered by a loud, desperate scream. It pierced the soft wind and the rustling of the grass, cutting through the calm that had surrounded the rancher for so long. He froze in his chair, the letter still clutched loosely in his hand. The sound was urgent, full of fear and panic, and it carried across the fields, echoing in the distant hills. He rose slowly, unsure at first if he should investigate. He had lived alone for so many years that he had grown accustomed to silence, and the thought of interruption made him uneasy. But the scream came again, louder this time, more frantic. There was no mistaking it. Someone was in trouble. He set the letter on the table, his fingers trembling slightly, and walked toward the edge of his property, scanning the open fields for the source of the sound. The sight that met his eyes surprised him. A woman was running along the uneven terrain, her long black hair streaming behind her in the wind. She carried a small child in her arms, a child no older than 5 who clung to her tightly, sobbing. Her face was full of fear and exhaustion, her eyes wide and searching desperately. The rancher instinctively stepped forward, his heart pounding. He had never seen her before, Yet her distress made him feel an urgent need to act. The woman's voice carried over the fields as she shouted again. Her words were in a language he did not understand, a series of rapid, sharp sounds that made the urgency in her tone clear even without translation. He could see her gestures, frantic movements pointing toward the distant tree line, then hugging her child closer. The rancher realized she must be lost, or perhaps something had frightened her child. He felt a strange mix of fear and responsibility. This was not part of the quiet life he had prepared for, yet he could not ignore it. He began to move toward her, calling out in his own language, hoping to communicate some calm. "Hey, it's okay. I'm here to help." His voice carried across the field, and the woman glanced in his direction, her eyes lighting briefly with hope before the fear returned. She ran a few steps closer, then stopped, unsure whether to trust him. Her child whimpered again, tiny hands clutching her mother's shoulders as if trying to hold on to safety in a world that suddenly felt too large. The rancher approached cautiously, his movements slow and deliberate. He did not want to startle her or make the situation worse. As he drew near, he could see the details of her face, the worry etched into her features, the fatigue in her eyes, and the determination in her every movement. She was beautiful in a quiet, striking way, but beauty did not lessen the fear that radiated from her. He felt a pang of empathy. Here was someone far from home, struggling in an unfamiliar place, and he was the only person around who could offer help. Finally, they were close enough that he could speak more calmly. "You're safe now.
Come over here slowly. It's okay.
Nothing will hurt you." His words were careful, deliberate, trying to bridge the gap between their languages. The woman paused, looking at him as if deciding whether he could be trusted. Her child whimpered softly again, and she hugged him tighter. Slowly, she began to move toward him, her steps hesitant but steady, the child clinging to her like a small, fragile shadow. Once they were near enough, he held out his hand gently. "It's okay. You're safe now," he repeated. She nodded slightly, her body still tense, and allowed him to lead them a short distance toward the porch. The rancher noticed the child's eyes, wide and fearful, scanning every corner of the open space as if trying to find something familiar. The child's tiny hand gripped the mother's sleeve so tightly that it seemed almost painful. He realized how small and vulnerable they were in this vast, lonely landscape. Inside the house, he motioned for them to sit on the old wooden bench. The woman lowered herself carefully, holding her child close. She whispered something softly in her own language, words he could not understand, but the tone was gentle, almost soothing. The child leaned against her chest, slowly calming as the initial panic began to fade. The rancher went to fetch some water, careful not to make sudden movements. He handed a cup to the woman, then another to the child. Their hands trembled as they took it, and he realized how much fear had gripped them just moments ago. He tried to speak again, keeping his voice slow and steady. "What happened? Are you okay?" The woman shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. She pointed toward the fields, then back at the child, trying to convey a story through gestures and broken phrases. The rancher listened, nodding, piecing together what he could. Something had scared her child. Perhaps they had wandered off and gotten lost. Perhaps something else had frightened them. Whatever it was, the fear had been real and immediate. As she spoke with gestures, he began to feel a connection forming. He realized that despite the language barrier, they were communicating on a deeper level, a shared understanding of fear, relief, and the need for safety. He could see her gratitude even through her exhaustion and panic. She was far from home, alone with a small child, and yet she had found him, a stranger in the wilderness, who could offer help and protection. Time seemed to slow as they sat there together. The rancher felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in many years. He had lived in solitude for so long that human connection had become almost foreign to him, yet now it was arriving in the most unexpected way. The woman, sensing the calm he offered, began to relax slightly. Her child stopped trembling, slowly beginning to trust the stranger who had become their protector. Night fell fully, and the stars emerged, twinkling above the open fields. The rancher moved carefully around them, checking the doors and making sure the house was safe. He could hear the woman speaking softly to her child, words he could not understand, but they seemed to comfort the little one. He realized that their survival depended not just on physical safety, but on trust. Trust that had to be built slowly, with patience and care. Over the next hour, he offered simple food: bread, some cheese, and warm water. They ate quietly, the tension slowly easing. The woman glanced at him occasionally, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and curiosity. She gestured toward the fields, pointing out something that had caused the panic. The rancher nodded, understanding that they had narrowly escaped danger. Perhaps the child had wandered too close to the cattle or fallen into the tall grass. He did not need all the details to know that their safety was now his responsibility, at least for the night. By the time the moon hung high in the sky, the woman was calmer, and the child had finally drifted into sleep in her arms. The rancher sat nearby, watching over them, thinking about how a single scream had changed the course of his evening. He had begun the night ready to say goodbye to the world in a quiet letter, but now life had intruded in a way he could never have imagined. He realized, with a sense of wonder, that the world had a way of surprising even the most prepared hearts. Just when he had accepted solitude, just when he had convinced himself that life had nothing left to offer, a stranger had appeared, a mother, her child, and the fear that had driven them to his doorstep. And in that fear, in that desperate need for help, he had found a spark of purpose that he had not felt in years. The night was quiet again, but different now. The sounds of the ranch, the distant rustling of grass, the gentle breathing of the child, the soft whisper of the wind, seemed fuller, richer. The rancher knew that this encounter was only the beginning, that life was not done with him yet. Something unexpected had arrived, and he could not yet see where it would lead. But he could feel that change had begun. He looked at the woman, asleep with her child, and felt a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. The letter he had written earlier, filled with farewells and regrets, now seemed distant and almost unnecessary. Life had offered him something different, a chance to connect, to help, and perhaps to heal both himself and these strangers who had stumbled into his world. The rancher settled in a chair nearby, his eyes never leaving them. The night stretched on, quiet but alive, and he realized that the scream that had startled him at first was not a sign of danger alone. It was a call to action, a reminder that life could still surprise, still bring purpose, still weave connections in the most unexpected ways. And in that moment, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time: hope. The morning light crept slowly across the ranch, brushing the fields with a soft golden glow. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of grass, earth, and dew. Inside the small house, the rancher stirred in his chair, careful not to wake the woman or her child, who were still asleep. He watched them for a moment, marveling at how peaceful they looked after the long night of fear and confusion. The child's small hand rested gently on the mother's arm, and the mother's face, though still tired, had relaxed into a quiet serenity. It was a rare sight on this lonely ranch, a moment of calm and connection that made the rancher feel something he had almost forgotten, a sense of family, even if temporary. He quietly stood and stepped outside to the porch. The morning was alive with sound, birds calling to one another, the distant lowing of cattle, and the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees. He took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill his lungs, and for a brief moment he allowed himself to imagine life differently. For so many years he had believed that his life would always be solitary, filled only with work and quiet. But the events of the previous night had shifted something inside him. The appearance of the woman and her child, frightened and lost, had reminded him that life could arrive unexpectedly, bringing connection and purpose even to those who thought they were alone forever. When the woman finally stirred and opened her eyes, the rancher smiled gently. "Good morning," he said softly. "Did you sleep well?" The woman blinked a few times, trying to focus, and then nodded slowly. Her child, still sleepy, reached up and rubbed their eyes, looking around the room as if checking to see where they were. The rancher gestured toward the kitchen. "There's breakfast," he said simply. She hesitated for a moment, uncertain, then followed him, her child clinging to her side. He prepared a simple breakfast: eggs, bread, and some fruit he had picked from a small tree outside. He set it on the table and motioned for them to sit. The woman smiled faintly, a shy, tentative expression that spoke of gratitude and relief. She did not speak much, but her gestures and expressions were enough for the rancher to understand her meaning. She offered him a small nod and a quiet "thank you" in broken English. The child, curious and hungry, began to eat slowly, their small hands clumsily picking up pieces of bread. The rancher felt warmth spread through his chest as he watched them. This simple moment of sharing food felt more meaningful than anything he had experienced in years. After breakfast, he led them outside to show them around the ranch. The fields stretched endlessly, dotted with cattle grazing peacefully. The woman walked carefully beside him, her eyes taking in every detail: the fences, the barn, the animals. The child toddled along, occasionally stopping to watch a cow or a bird, their eyes wide with wonder. The rancher began to explain his daily routine, pointing out the different areas of the ranch and the responsibilities each required. Even though the woman could not understand every word, she listened intently, nodding and asking questions through gestures. As the day progressed, the rancher found himself teaching her simple tasks: how to feed the animals, how to carry buckets of water, and how to recognize the different sounds of the cattle. She was eager to learn, moving with careful attention and a determination that impressed him. He could see that she was resilient, strong, and capable, even in the face of fear and uncertainty. Her child watched from a distance, occasionally imitating her movements or giggling at small discoveries, and the rancher felt a sense of connection growing between them. He also began to share stories of his own life. He spoke of the years he had spent alone, the challenges of maintaining the ranch, and the quiet moments that had defined his days. He told her about the cattle, the land, and the changing seasons. Though the woman could not understand every word, the rancher's tone, expressions, and gestures communicated meaning. She responded in kind, sharing bits of her own story through broken English and gestures: her life in a distant country, her struggles as a single mother, and her journey that had brought her to this remote place. As they worked together, a sense of trust began to develop. The woman grew more comfortable around him, and her child began to follow his instructions with curiosity rather than fear. The rancher realized that they were forming a bond, one built not on words alone, but on shared effort, mutual respect, and a growing understanding of each other's struggles. He felt a sense of pride and responsibility, recognizing that he had become a protector and guide in this new chapter of their lives. By midday, they had completed several small tasks: feeding the animals, checking fences, and tidying the barn. The woman wiped sweat from her brow, smiling faintly, and the rancher felt a warmth he had not felt in years. He realized that life had returned to the ranch in a way he had never anticipated. The quiet solitude he had once cherished was now filled with laughter, movement, and the small, meaningful interactions that made life feel rich and full. As the afternoon sun climbed high in the sky, they rested beneath a large oak tree near the edge of the fields. The child played nearby, chasing small birds and exploring the grass, while the woman leaned back against the trunk, her eyes closing briefly as she enjoyed a rare moment of calm. The rancher sat beside her, watching them both, and felt a profound sense of contentment. He had spent so many years alone, focused only on work and survival. But now he understood that life's meaning often came through connection, through helping, sharing, and caring for others. They began to talk more openly as the day wore on. The woman used gestures and broken English to describe her experiences, and the rancher listened patiently, asking questions and offering encouragement. He was impressed by her resilience and her dedication to her child, and he felt a growing admiration for her strength. In turn, she seemed to respect him for his wisdom, his patience, and the care he had shown in helping them. Though their communication was limited, they understood each other in ways that went beyond words. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon once more, the rancher led them back to the house. They had accomplished much that day, not just in terms of work, but in forming trust and understanding. The woman had learned some of the ranch routines, the child had begun to feel safe, and the rancher had discovered a new sense of purpose that had eluded him for decades. He realized that this encounter was no accident, that life had brought them together for a reason, and that their connection was a gift he had not expected. That evening, they shared a simple meal together. The rancher cooked what little he had available, and the woman helped in small ways, offering gestures of thanks and sharing the food with her child. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by the child's occasional questions and laughter. The rancher felt a deep satisfaction as he watched them, understanding that this was the beginning of something meaningful, a bond that would grow stronger over time, built on trust, care, and the shared experiences of each day. Later, as night fell and stars twinkled above the open fields, the rancher found himself thinking about the letter he had written the night before. The words that had once felt so final now seemed distant and unnecessary. Life had presented him with a new path, one filled with responsibility, connection, and hope. He realized that endings were not always what they seemed. Sometimes a new beginning could arrive when least expected, even in the form of strangers seeking help and comfort. He sat quietly, listening to the woman speaking softly to her child in her own language. Though he did not understand every word, he could sense the love, care, and reassurance in her voice. He felt a deep respect for her and a growing admiration for the way she navigated her challenges with courage and determination. In that quiet moment, he understood that life's most meaningful experiences often came through connection with others, through empathy, trust, and shared effort. As the night deepened, the rancher realized that he was no longer alone. The presence of the woman and her child had transformed the ranch, bringing warmth, energy, and purpose back into his life. He had spent years in solitude, believing that his life would always be quiet and empty. But now he understood that life had a way of surprising even the most prepared hearts. The woman's arrival, her trust, and the bond they had begun to form had opened a door to a new chapter, one filled with hope, understanding, and the promise of shared experiences. He looked at them both, sleeping peacefully now, and felt a sense of gratitude he could hardly describe. Life had brought them to his doorstep for a reason, and he knew that the coming days would be filled with challenges, learning, and growth for all of them. But for the first time in many years, He felt ready to face those days with an open heart, guided by the connection he had begun to build with these strangers who had become so important to him in such a short time. In that quiet night, under the vast expanse of the star-filled sky, the rancher realized that life could never be fully planned or predicted. Solitude, he now understood, could be interrupted in the most extraordinary ways, bringing lessons, companionship, and hope where none had existed before. And as he drifted off to sleep beside the small family he had taken in, he felt a deep, comforting certainty that this unexpected connection had changed the course of his life forever. The next morning, the ranch woke with the sun casting soft light over the fields, the cattle slowly moving across the grass, and the wind carrying the scent of fresh earth. The rancher had risen early, as was his habit, but today he noticed something different. The small house was no longer empty and quiet. It was alive with movement and the soft sounds of life. The woman was already awake, quietly preparing breakfast, while her child played nearby, humming softly to themselves. The sight brought a warmth to his chest he had not felt in years. Life, he realized, was slowly returning to the ranch in ways he had never expected. He stepped into the kitchen to offer help, carrying water and fresh bread. She greeted him with a smile, simple but genuine, and gestured for him to set the table. They did not need many words. Their actions spoke volumes. The child sat eagerly at the table, their eyes bright with curiosity and energy. As they ate, the rancher felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The work of the ranch, the routines of daily life, and the quiet moments of shared meals were no longer solitary tasks. They were part of a rhythm of togetherness, small but meaningful. After breakfast, the rancher suggested they begin work in the fields. She followed him, carrying small tools and water for the animals, while the child trailed close behind. Today they would mend fences, feed the cattle, and gather hay. The woman moved with determination, learning quickly from his instructions. Her gestures showed patience and care, and the rancher admired her resilience. Even though she spoke little English, her willingness to understand and follow his guidance created a strong bond between them. As they worked, he began to notice how naturally the child adapted to the ranch environment. The little one ran joyfully among the animals, observing them closely, asking questions in their own language, and laughing at their movements. The rancher guided them gently, teaching simple lessons about the animals and the land. He realized that even the smallest moments, a smile, a laugh, a gentle touch, were powerful reminders of life's beauty and the importance of human connection. By midday, they paused under the shade of a large oak tree near the barn. The woman leaned against the trunk, wiping sweat from her brow, while the rancher sat beside her, quietly observing the child at play. He could see how much the woman cared for her child, how her every gesture was full of love and attention. He felt a deep respect for her, not only for her strength, but for her dedication and patience. In turn, she seemed to notice his own quiet resilience and steady presence. Though they could not converse fluently, a shared understanding had formed, a language of gestures, expressions, and shared experiences. As the day went on, their work continued in harmony. They moved through the ranch as a team, feeding animals, repairing fences, and tending to small tasks that kept the property alive and functioning. The rancher began to share more about the land, pointing out the seasons, explaining the habits of the cattle, and teaching small skills that he had learned over decades. She absorbed everything carefully, asking questions through gestures and expressions, eager to learn and contribute. Each task became an opportunity for trust and understanding to grow. The child began to participate more actively, following instructions, helping to carry small items, and observing closely how the work was done. The rancher noticed the joy in the child's movements, the laughter, the curiosity, the delight in discovering new things. He realized that, in this small, remote place, life was becoming richer than it had ever been in his years of solitude. The laughter of a child, the presence of a caring mother, and the work of daily life all intertwined to create a sense of belonging he had thought impossible. By evening, the work was done, and the rancher invited them to rest near the porch. The woman and her child sat together, relaxed for the first time in what felt like weeks. The rancher watched them, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. He realized that life had transformed around him. The ranch was no longer simply a place of labor. It had become a home, a space filled with laughter, learning, and the small joys that make life meaningful. As the days passed, their routine became more established. The rancher noticed subtle changes. The woman's confidence grew, the child's curiosity and comfort increased, and his own heart began to feel lighter. Each day brought small victories: a fence repaired, a calf fed, a meal shared. Each victory carried more than practical value. It carried emotional weight, strengthening the bonds between them. Life, he realized, was no longer about enduring solitude, but about engaging fully with the people around him. Evenings became moments of quiet reflection. They often gathered near the porch, watching the sunset over the rolling fields. Sometimes the woman would speak softly in her language, telling stories about her homeland. The rancher listened intently, appreciating the cadence and emotion, even if the words were foreign. He shared his own stories, pointing out the memories in the land around them: the tree where he had first repaired a fence, the spot where the first calf had been born, the barn that had sheltered decades of hard work. Words were not always necessary. Presence, attention, and shared experience carried more meaning than any language could convey. The child, now growing more comfortable, often sat between them, asking questions, laughing, or simply enjoying the quiet companionship. The rancher found himself reading the little one's expressions, learning the nuances of emotion and need. He marveled at how such small beings could teach so much about care, patience, and unconditional love. The woman watched them together, occasionally joining in stories or games, creating moments that would become memories for all of them. As the weeks went on, the rancher and the woman discovered new ways to work and live together. She helped in the kitchen, learning to cook simple meals with ingredients available on the ranch. He taught her how to handle tools safely, repair fences efficiently, and care for the animals. Every small skill gained strengthened her independence and confidence. In turn, she offered insights from her own experiences, suggesting ways to improve routines, care for the child, or prepare meals more efficiently. Their collaboration became seamless, a rhythm that transformed daily labor into shared purpose. Life on the ranch, once predictable and lonely, now carried a quiet vibrancy. The rancher found joy in waking to laughter, in guiding the woman through tasks, and in watching the child discover the wonders of the land. Each day brought challenges, of course. Repairs needed attention, animals required care, and unexpected problems arose. But these challenges no longer felt burdensome. They were opportunities to work together, to teach and learn, and to strengthen the bonds that had begun to form so unexpectedly. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat near the barn, watching the sky transform into a deep purple and gold canvas. The child, sleepy and content, rested in the mother's arms. The woman leaned against the rancher lightly, a gesture of trust and comfort. For the first time in years, he felt the warmth of family, not by blood, but by shared life, effort, and care. He realized that he had found something far more valuable than solitude: connection, purpose, and the chance to nurture life beyond his own. The rancher thought about the letter he had written before the woman and her child arrived. The words, filled with goodbyes and regret, now seemed unnecessary. Life had offered him something unexpected, a path to renewal, companionship, and hope. He understood that endings were not always final, and that even in moments of despair, life could bring new beginnings in the most surprising forms. The letter, once a symbol of farewell, now felt like a relic of a past he was leaving behind. Night fell over the ranch, but the energy of life remained. The stars sparkled above, and the soft sounds of animals filled the air. The rancher, the woman, and the child sat quietly together, sharing stories, laughter, and simple meals. Their lives, once separate and uncertain, had begun to intertwine in ways that promised growth, learning, and joy. The rancher felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not from completing tasks or tending to the land, but from witnessing the transformation of life around him. The ranch was alive, not just with animals and fields, but with human connection, care, and hope. And in that quiet yet vibrant moment, the rancher understood something he had long forgotten. Life, no matter how lonely or difficult it might seem, had a way of surprising those willing to open their hearts. Purpose, companionship, and love could arrive unexpectedly, and even in the most remote corners of the world, the human spirit could find renewal through connection, effort, and shared experience. The ranch awoke to another golden sunrise, and with it came a sense of peace the rancher had not felt in decades. The soft light spread across the fields, catching on the grass and cattle, painting everything in warm hues of hope. The air was filled with the gentle hum of life, birds calling to one another, the faint lowing of cows, and the quiet movements of the ranch itself. But what made the morning truly remarkable was the life inside the little house on the ranch. The woman and her child had settled into the space with an ease that was almost magical, as though the land itself had accepted them and welcomed them into its rhythm. The rancher stood on the porch, watching them quietly. The woman was preparing breakfast, moving with a calm confidence, while the child ran joyfully through the yard, chasing small birds and laughing. For the rancher, this was a moment of quiet revelation. He had spent so many years alone, believing solitude was his only companion. Yet now, life had unfolded in a way he could not have predicted. The bond he had begun to form with the woman and her child was growing stronger each day, bringing warmth, laughter, and meaning to his once lonely existence. After breakfast, they worked together as they had done for weeks now, tending to the cattle, repairing fences, and maintaining the barn. Each day the woman grew more skilled, her confidence shining through her careful movements. The child followed along, eager to help, their small hands learning to carry tools or gather hay. The rancher watched them with pride, realizing that the presence of others had transformed the ranch itself. It was no longer merely a place of labor. It was alive with cooperation, learning, and joy. Each task, no matter how small, became a shared triumph, a celebration of life and effort. By midday, they rested beneath a large oak tree near the edge of the fields. The woman leaned back against the trunk, her hands resting on the child's small shoulders. The rancher sat beside them, watching the sunlight dance across the fields. He felt a quiet satisfaction he had never known before, not from the work itself, but from witnessing the growth, trust, and happiness of those he had come to care for deeply. He realized that life's true value did not come from solitude or possessions, but from connection, empathy, and the bonds we form with others. As the days turned into weeks, the rhythm of their lives became more established. The rancher and the woman found comfort in the routines of daily life, learning from each other, teaching each other, and building a sense of family. She shared stories of her past, her homeland, and her struggles, her words often accompanied by gestures that conveyed emotion even when language failed. The rancher listened with patience and understanding, offering guidance and wisdom where he could. Together, they created a home that was safe, nurturing, and full of quiet joy. Even the child thrived in this new environment. The laughter, curiosity, and sense of wonder that filled their days became a source of inspiration for the rancher. He learned to read their expressions, understand their needs, and celebrate their small victories. He watched the child grow more confident with each passing day, learning to navigate the ranch, care for the animals, and explore the world with a sense of safety and curiosity. In these moments, the rancher felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing he was contributing to the growth and happiness of another life. As the sun began to set one evening, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple, the rancher sat on the porch, the woman beside him, and the child playing quietly at their feet. The air was calm, the fields peaceful, and the sense of contentment profound. He thought back to the night when he had written the farewell letter, the words of finality and loneliness he had poured onto paper. How distant and unnecessary those words now seemed. Life had given him a new purpose, a new family, and a chance to rediscover hope, love, and connection. The woman spoke softly in her language, her voice filled with warmth and reassurance for her child. Though the rancher could not understand every word, he understood the emotion, the intent, and the care behind them. It was a language of love, protection, and belonging, one that needed no translation. He realized that language was never a barrier to connection when hearts and intentions were aligned. The bond they shared transcended words, and in that silence he felt a deep sense of fulfillment and peace. One evening, after a long day of work, the rancher suggested they take a walk through the fields together. The woman held the child's hand, and he followed close behind, enjoying the simple pleasure of walking side by side. The wind carried the scent of grass and wild flowers, and the sky above was a canvas of stars beginning to twinkle. In this shared quiet, the rancher felt the depth of change that had come to his life. Where there had once been emptiness, there was now warmth. Where there had been solitude, there was now connection. Life, in its unpredictable and beautiful way, had offered him a gift he had never expected. As the months passed, the ranch continued to flourish. The woman became an integral part of life on the ranch, her skills and care making every day more manageable and joyful. She developed routines, cared for the animals, and nurtured the child's curiosity and happiness. The rancher found himself learning from her as much as he taught, appreciating her perspectives, creativity, and insight. Together they faced challenges, weather, repairs, and the daily demands of rural life, but each obstacle became an opportunity to work as a team, building trust, understanding, and resilience. The child, growing more confident each day, became a symbol of hope and renewal. Their laughter filled the ranch, a sound that reminded the rancher of the beauty and fragility of life. He watched the little one explore, play, and learn, realizing that these moments were the true treasure of existence. In guiding and caring for them, he discovered a sense of purpose that far exceeded anything he had known in solitude. Life had returned to him, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, steady rhythm of shared effort, learning, and joy. As the years went by, the bond between the rancher, the woman, and her child deepened. They celebrated small victories together: a calf born safely, a fence repaired, a meal shared, and they comforted each other through challenges. Life had transformed from a solitary struggle into a shared journey of growth, connection, and love. The ranch, once a place of quiet labor and isolation, had become a home, alive with laughter, learning, and hope. One evening, as the sun set and the sky was painted in soft shades of orange and purple, the rancher pulled out the letter he had written so long ago. He looked at it carefully, the words of farewell and regret, now a relic of the past. With a smile, he folded it gently and placed it beneath the roots of a large tree near the porch, a symbolic gesture of letting go, of leaving the old life behind and embracing the new one fully. It was a quiet act, but it carried immense meaning. He was no longer saying goodbye. He was beginning a chapter filled with connection, purpose, and love. That night, the rancher sat with the woman and her child under the vast, star-filled sky. The air was calm, filled with the gentle sounds of the ranch at rest. He felt a profound gratitude for the twists of fate that had brought them together, for the unexpected scream that had shattered his solitude, and for the bonds that had grown from that single moment. Life, he realized, was unpredictable, fragile, and beautiful, and the most meaningful experiences often came from the connections we forge with others. The woman rested her head lightly on his shoulder. The child nestled between them, and for the first time in decades, the rancher felt complete. The ranch was no longer simply a place of work or isolation. It was a home filled with life, laughter, and hope. He understood, finally, that endings were never truly final. Life always had a way of bringing new beginnings, unexpected gifts, and the chance to heal, grow, and love again. In the quiet of that night, surrounded by the people he had come to care for most deeply, the rancher realized that he had found something far greater than he had ever imagined. Solitude had once defined him, but connection had transformed him. Hardship had once marked his days, but love and purpose now illuminated them. The letter he had written meant to say goodbye now felt like a bridge, a symbol of a life transformed by compassion, resilience, and unexpected encounters. As the stars shone overhead, the rancher whispered a silent promise to himself to cherish these moments, nurture these connections, and embrace life with an open heart. The woman and her child stirred slightly, sensing his presence and warmth, and the rancher felt a deep sense of belonging. Life, unpredictable and full of twists, had brought them together, and in that togetherness, he had found the greatest treasure of all: hope, love, and the knowledge that no one truly needed to face the world alone. The rancher smiled softly, watching the gentle rise and fall of the child's breathing and the peaceful expression on the woman's face. For the first time in a long time, he knew he was exactly where he belonged. The ranch, the fields, the animals, the woman, and the child had all become parts of his heart. The farewell letter, once filled with despair, had been replaced by a life filled with meaning. Life, he realized, was never truly over until love and connection were fully embraced. And in that quiet night, under the endless sky, he felt that embrace fully and completely.